Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your overview, Minister. The descriptor on page 262 of the budget explains that the output funded by the line item 5.6 delivers a range of policies, programs and services to encourage all Tasmanians to participate in sport and active recreation, and also includes the Tasmanian Institute of Sport, responsible for providing opportunities for elite athletes. The line item shows the appropriation decreasing by 72% across the forward estimates from $84.16 million in 2025-26 to just $24.31 million in 2028-29. So how do you explain this significant decrease in funding for sport and recreation participation and Tasmanian Institute of Sport funding?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the question. As we know, this is an interim budget. Consideration for investment decisions for future years, particularly 28-29, will be carefully considered in future budgets. Importantly, this will be informed by work that we've done to develop the community sporting infrastructure portal, and we'll take a strategic look at needs across the sector and around the state. Part of the reason for the drop-off is that a number of current and previous significant developments, such as Northern Suburbs Hub, Glenorchy Sports Centre, etc., will have been completed over this time, and expended funds to deliver these fantastic facilities will have been expended. And it's important to remember that the government has spent more than $200 million in the last 5 years on community sporting infrastructure, and we are continuing this delivery in partnership with the Commonwealth and local government. And through this collaboration and careful planning, the government will continue to invest significantly in this critical area, and this will be done through future budget processes. And I note there are some areas where there are gaps in this particular budget which will be need to be contemplated in future iterations.
Thank you. So capital funding aside, in relation to the actual participation and elite sport outcomes delivered by this budget line, can you be clear on what the cuts are across the forward estimates to those elements? Because my understanding, based on the descriptor provided on page 262 of the budget papers, is that this is operating funding, and grants and subsidies and capital are included in a separate line item. So can you just clarify, you just mentioned that part of the reason for the significant drop-off from $84.1 million to $24.3 million across the forward estimates is because the capital projects that you mentioned will be taken out of the line item. But my expectation would have been those capital projects would have actually been included in the capital investment line item rather than the 5.6 sport and recreation line item. So can you just clarify what you said there? Are those capital projects actually included in 5.6?
So in terms of comments you make around cuts, there are no cuts. There are considerations for future budgets. But in terms of the detail requested, I might pass it to the Secretary here to give you what you seek and clarify any of those points.
Thank you, Minister, and through you. So, Ms Thomas, it depends on who is actually going to be the asset owner. So if the state remains the asset owner, we actually capitalise it, as you said, and it'll be in the capitalised. But where we provide funding for sporting infrastructure that is going to be owned by local government, for example, it's through a grant. So I'll use an example. In the 25-26 budget, there's $13.5 million over 2 years for the Dial Regional Sporting Complex in Penguin to enhance its capacity to host statewide and national content. That asset is not a government asset. That asset will remain a council asset, and so it is a grant that is paid out by the department, and we enter into a grant deed with the council with a number of milestones and outcomes, and we make those payments. So not all, if I inverted commas, capital projects which are being delivered through the sporting outcome are actually capitalised because they don't meet the definition under the Australian accounting standards, because we're ultimately not the asset owner.
Okay, so so are you able to provide a breakdown then of line items 5.6, grants and subsidies and capital investment, just for the committee's understanding of what is actually included in there? Because you just said that they're provided as a grant,
So just...
Sorry, through you, Minister, or Minister, are you able to provide a breakdown of the difference there? Because what I just heard the Secretary say was that those grants, if government doesn't own the asset, are provided to local government. There is also a grants and subsidies line in the budget, so I'm just seeking some clarity on, are those grants included in that? So for 25-26, there's 6.9 million in grants and subsidies. So what's included in that line item?
Thank you. Appreciate that question. And Craig, that might be one you've got.
I don't have that, Minister, but if the member's happy to put it on notice, if you're comfortable, we'll answer that and be very clear on what are operating capital grants at a top level. As you would know, through the 24-25 budget, DSG had a significant number of election commitments to sporting organisations. Got there. And in the budget paper, it goes on for like 3 or 4 pages. So if we list them all out, it'll be voluminous. And but we'll give you enough information for you to be able to understand that information and reconcile back to last year's budget paper, Ms. Thomas.
Is that likely to be a piece of information that we could provide before the end of the day?
I think we should be able to, Minister.
Great. Thank you.
So what you're saying there, Minister, is that there will be no cuts to participation initiatives. Is that what you're committing to over the forward estimates? But they will be subject to future budget consideration. So clearly there's a significant decline. But, state sporting organisations and clubs who rely heavily on the funding provided through this budget line are rightly quite concerned about the significant drop-off in that funding line. So how do you respond to that in terms of if sport and keeping Tasmanians active is a priority of this government? That's clearly not reflected in the budget papers. How can state sporting organisations and local community clubs be assured that, they won't be being asked to do more with less, because that's what it looks like in the numbers?
Well, as I say, this is our interim budget. We will certainly not my intention for there to be any cuts to those current, those currently funded organisations.
And through you, Minister, if the member, just in relation to the specifics, so for example, I can advise that Cricket Tasmania, for example, is funded through the forward estimates. RecLink, for example, there is funding there for those. So AFL Tasmania, Basketball Tasmania, Football Tasmania, Hockey Tasmania, there are allocations across the forward estimates for each of those organisations that support community participation and community organisations and participation in those groups. So they are included in the budget in the numbers.
Well, I appreciate getting that breakdown, because as you can appreciate, it's hard to scrutinise it without knowing what that breakdown is, so it's a bit difficult. But on page 239, it provides a breakdown of, it doesn't provide a breakdown, it provides a figure of $11.59 million for major sporting partnerships in the key deliverables table. So can you provide a breakdown of what that $11.59 million specifically is for?
Through you, Minister.
In events funding, is there?
The major sporting partnership is actually under this line item, and so this is the funding for the Hawthorn football agreement renewal, the Jack Jumpers sponsorship renewal, and the continuation of the Cricket Tas additional uplift that the government committed to in the 24-25 budget.
Okay, so Hawthorn, Jack Jumpers and Cricket Tasmania are all funded through that $11.5 million total. Are you able to provide a breakdown of that funding?
Have you got that there?
I don't have that and a breakdown on the actual. I've just got it in total.
Which one? I think I've probably got that somewhere. Are we going to find it now? No, we're working it.
So my other question, while that information is gathered, my other related question is that this funding to major sporting partnerships is only appropriated until 2026-27. So do these 3 major sporting partnerships end in 2026-27, or is the funding reflected elsewhere in the budget?
In terms of that question, major sporting partnerships.
So currently the major sporting partnerships are, for example, Jack Jumpers are currently in the process of a renegotiation, and so the budget has allocated the funding that is required that we've entered into. There will be future decisions for government should they want to continue on entering those contracts at those points in time.
So the current deal with the Jack Jumpers ends in 2026-27?
The current deal is, my understanding, is being renegotiated at this stage. So the government has made an allocation in the budget to enable us to work through that process at the moment.
Okay.
Can I just clarify when it actually runs out then, the current one? You're in negotiation now. When does this one actually finish?
Just one second, I'm sorry.
Jack Jumpers,
Okay. Sorry, you've got that?
No, we'll get there.
And I just would point out that we will have Brett Stewart here shortly, who will have a greater level of understanding because he not only looks after that, but looks after events as well. So in terms of any gaps that we've got, Brett I think he's 15 minutes away, or 15 minutes away at the beginning of the session.
Timing challenge.
So we can provide those answers. How did we
So have we got that answer or not?
No, we're just seeking the advice.
Right.
So,
And Amanda's just writing down this one. So in terms of the breakdown of the major sporting partnerships, Cricket Tas 3.56 million, the Jack Jumpers 2 million, and Hawthorn Football Club 4.55 million. Yeah.
Okay, so $4.55 million to Hawthorn, $2 million to the Jack Jumpers, and $3.56 million to Cricket Tasmania.
Yep.
Do they receive, those three organisations receive funding from any other line in the budget?
through you, Minister, there is a portion of this funded through the events events funding as well.
For all three?
Yes, my understanding is for all three.
Okay, I wasn't aware the Jack Jumpers got events funding, but happy to hear about that if that's the case.
So does the money you just, or the amount you've just given us, does that include the events funding or just the sports funding?
Sports funding.
Just the sports funding.
So where is the $12 million sponsorship of the Tasmanian Devils Football Club reflected in the forward estimates?
That one I will have to check, Minister, I'm sorry.
No problem. We'll just go and... Yes, that's right. We have that. Where is that?
So through you, Minister, my advice is that it was included in the 24-25 budget under this initiative, and the money allocated is 5.8 million in 25-26, in 26-27, 5.8 million, in 27-28, 12, in 28-29, 12.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, which line though is that in?
My understanding is it's 5.6.
Oh, it is in
That one
5.6,
is
sorry.
in 5.6.
Okay, so where the description on page 262 talks about encouraging participation in sport and recreation, all Tasmanians, my understanding was that this is more for the community and elite, but it also includes, by the sounds of it, sponsorships for professional sport in the line item 5.6.
If that's where it is, yep.
Yeah, through you, Minister, as part of my understanding, as part of the club AFL club funding deed, is a commitment from the Devils to commit to working on participation and in in the community and how they deliver that and work with our community to increase participation in AFL and other sports. And so that's why it's included in this line. Similar with the Jack Jumpers, there are metrics in there that have the Jack Jumpers encourage community participation in basketball as well.
So just to be clear then, there'll be $12 million allocated from that 5.6 line item to the Devils Football Club in 2028-29, which would leave the pool for community sport and elite sport at the Tasmanian Institute of Sport, grassroots participation, state sporting organisations, as it's currently budgeted at about half of that, which is 12 million. So 12 million to AFL, the Devils, and 12 million to the rest of community sport across the state.
And of course, that is not to consider decisions that will be made in future budgets.
That's the plan, according to these forward estimates. That's the government setting the priorities across the forward estimates. Is basically sending that message that of our bucket of money for sport, we're going to allocate half to the AFL Devils Football Club and the other half to the rest of sport across all of the different codes at all of the different levels in Tasmania. You agree that that's a fair analysis of that line and appropriation?
That's how you would like to characterise it? Yes.
So the total funding amount that the government will provide to the Devils over the 10-year funding agreement, is that $120 million, $12 million a year, or are there additional sponsorship amounts included in the AFL deal?
Shane, have you got that?
I'd have to just check that. Take it on.
You got that?
Does that include the 5.5 for the next couple of years?
Ms. Thomas is looking for the total amount over the club funding deal. What's the total amount? And I'm happy to trade it.
I haven't seen the latest version.
It's the same thing.
Just take the notice.
Just going to have to calculate that, Minister.
Okay. I've got to get the calculator out. Right.
Okay, so my other related question on that matter is how much funding the Devils will put into community sport over the 10 years. So the government has regularly, Minister, the government has regularly quoted that the Devils will be putting $360 million into AFL in Tasmania. My understanding is $93 million of that will be for community development. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify if that is the case.
Great, thank you. The AFL has committed $358 million total to the new club in Tasmanian football, and that's $210 million for the operational funding of the new club, $10 million for the TNA Centre, $15 million for Macquarie Point, and $123 million for game development, grassroots football and talent academies.
Yeah. Minister, do you know how much of that $123 million is for grassroots?
I would need to seek a breakdown. Is that a breakdown that we have at this point?
No, I don't think so.
I'm not sure that I have seen in my time a breakdown of that.
I have not seen a breakdown either, Minister.
So, no.
So you can't tell me how much of that's game development? Maybe a question for the Devils. So the government, so do we have a final amount yet of how much the government will invest through the sponsorship deal with the Devils? Sorry.
Did our calculator work?
Oh.
No?
Not yet? Okay. While we're on AFL then, Minister, are you able to tell me what amounts is the government providing to other AFL clubs, including Hawthorn and Richmond, and over what agreed period through the forward estimate? So you mentioned the Hawthorn, there was funding to Hawthorn of $4.55 million in 2025, 26, 2026, 27.
Yep.
Over the 2 years.
Yep.
So a bit over $2 million per year for over 2 years. And Richmond, you've recently announced.
It would be more than that. I think the Hawthorn deal is $9 million from my memory for calendar year 26-27. So that's a total of 8 games. For Richmond, there are games scheduled in 26 and 27, one game per year. So there, I think, is $1 million each, so $2 million there. What else were we talking about?
Any other AFL
I don't think there are any. Well, there would be in AFLW, where we are there with North Melbourne, and would need to know and understand what that one looks like. If that's us or if that's events, potentially.
So the AFLW Hawthorn
Yep.
deals are through the events minister.
Yep, okay.
But the money for Hawthorn is in your budget through Sport and Rec.
Yes, in this beautifully tangled web that we have found ourselves with the separating of sport and events, there are a few vagaries in it also. The Hawthorn money, the deal sits with events, the money sits in sports. With the Richmond piece, I think the whole lot sits in events. The AFLW sits in events as well. So in terms of getting a whole of government picture of that, there's a bit of wrangling there.
Have we got the information about when the Hawthorn deal runs out?
Yeah, and 27.
It runs out in 27?
Yeah.
And through you, Minister, because this was an interim budget and the Speed Treasury had to work with, we weren't able to do all the appropriate splits. One of the things we will continue to do, work with Treasury between now and the actual budget next year, is actually to resolve some of these matters so they're in the right output on that.
Minister, would you expect in the May budget next year that all funding related to sport, like the North Melbourne women, who are an amazing team, who have had a record-breaking winning streak, Hawthorn, if it's renegotiated, and the Devils all appear in sport?
Look, it's perhaps not that simple. They are, by their nature, events, and they have a visitor economy impact, and I think they have been viewed as more impactful, perhaps, in that space than in the pure sports space, where we might seek to look after, the Tasmanian football AFL team, or grassroots sports more broadly. So there is a conversation ongoing and a amount of work that's happening in that
Well, let me
area.
reframe it then.
Okay.
And acknowledging the vagaries of this, but this is what makes it really hard for scrutiny and to understand the full amount of money that's being put into some of these things.
And I
on
would
behalf of the
try
people of Tasmania, and so I will ask, can we expect to see that all funding related to a particular venture, whether it be Richmond, North Melbourne women, or the Hawthorn Football Club, or the Tasmanian Devils team, to be in one line item?
Football.
AFL football.
I think that is that's a worthy aspiration. Again, I can't give you that commitment here today because there is work to be done. It is somewhat more complicated than it would appear at face value.
Maybe you should have events as well as sport and
Well, I used to, but I think there is,
Premier?
some.
So, Chair, may I, on that note, if not in the budget lines and set out like that in the budget,
Club question. We've got club question.
Minister, will you undertake to be transparent around the amount of funding provided and publish or make available the information about the amount of funding provided to the different levels of sport? Some of that will be reflected in the breakdown, I hope, that we get, but I guess that's my intention in trying to seek that breakdown, is for it to be
I have no
clear.
problem in showing you. I think it's absolutely what we should do. Sorry, so the Secretary has an answer to.
So your question regarding what's the state's providing for the commitment to the club. So the state is committed to delivering the Macquarie Point Stadium and the following matters for the club. So it's a $20 million for the establishment of the new club, $144 million for operating funding once it's established, that's in line with the expected AFL team commencement in 2028, which is why it goes to $12 million in the forward estimates, and $105 million for the training and administration base as well.
And I also am able to add that of the $123 million of benefit from AFL, $90 million will be spent on game development.
Which means?
Yep, so,
Grassroots game development.
well, I thought grassroots was separate. I thought you said game development, talent development and
Probably.
grassroots.
We're going to trade out, Minister.
Yes.
I'm just for the committee's information, we will work on that other reconciliation we promised the member as well before the end of the day, which is the breakdown of the operational, the grants, capital for ease for people.
And the total amount of spending on AFL across the, whichever area it is, so we know how much is exactly being.
The only missing bit there, I think, is AFLW. But anyway, so yes, thank you, Craig, Secretary Lincoln, off to the other place, and we will bring in Brett Stewart.
So, sorry, Minister, just to clarify, you said 93 million is for game development?
90 million.
90 million.
Of the 123 that was put in that bucket of...
Yep, so 93 million for...
90 million.
90 million, sorry, 90 million, which is around $9 million per year over the 10 years of the deal, $9 million a year. And the government is putting in, by that add up, minus the stadium, if you're talking about establishment funding, operational funding and funding for the High Performance Training Centre, 269 million. So effectively 269 million for, and the return back to grassroots from the Devils themselves is 90 million. Yep. So how much, you've talked about funding to the Jack Jumpers being part of that line item in the key deliverables of $2 million. Is that, does that include sponsorship for the WNBL team, or is that separate?
No, I don't believe it does. Have I, maybe one for you, Brett?
Thanks, Minister. Through you. So that's an aggregation of, which probably has already been discussed. If it has, apologies, because I haven't been Hawthorn.
It's all been a bit confusing, so...
Yeah, so it's been aggregated in previous
And
budgets.
I should, sorry, Brett, just for the benefit of Hansard, we have at the table Brett Stewart, Deputy Secretary, Creative Industries, Sport and Visitor Economy. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Minister. In previous budgets, it's correct to say that some of those individual sponsorship arrangements have been separated out. In this budget, they've been aggregated. That line item includes funding for Hawthorn, the 26-27 four-game sponsorship. The current recently extended 5-year sponsorship with the Jack Jumpers men's team, and an uplift following on from last year's uplift to Cricket Tasmania. The situation with the WNBL, we are currently in live negotiations with the Jack Jumpers around what options we might put to the Minister for consideration in terms of sponsorship options for the WNBL moving forward.
Okay, so there's no funding allocated in the budget here for the WNBL?
Not specifically.
Okay, but there's $2 million for the Jack Jumpers. And do you know when the current agreement with the Jack Jumpers expires?
So the original agreement was a 5+5, and the second 5 was executed last year, the end of last year. So there's 4 years remaining on that sponsorship agreement with the Jack Jumpers men's program.
Okay. So it's, from what we heard earlier though, there's only, so that includes $2 million sponsorship, but it's only reflected in the forward estimates for 1 year, is that right?
Correct. So it includes funding up until the end of the 26-27 financial year. Clearly, consideration will need to be given in the May budget for that arrangement, and whatever arrangement we reach, endorsed by the Minister with the WNBL.
Okay, so the reason it's not in the forward estimates is because it's under renegotiation as a one sponsorship package rather than two sponsorship packages, because it sounds like you've got a current agreement for another 4 years.
Yep.
Why wouldn't the $2 million for that be reflected in the forward estimates?
I suspect that's because this is an interim budget and been put together very quickly. Certainly, in our initial discussions with the Jack Jumpers about the WNBL, their preference was to wrap up their sponsorship for both programs into one arrangement, which clearly we would have a preference for if it was possible. And so potentially that's why Treasury have not made an allowance for those future years. However, in more recent discussions with the Jack Jumpers, I think we will be more likely to be entering into a separate arrangement with the WNBL franchise, because there will be some separation between those two, how those two teams are managed and operated.
The other point I think is reasonable to make around what's reflected in this budget and what may be reflected going forward is that piece of work that's happening in terms of sports and events and tourism, where these things will actually sit in future.
Mm-hmm. So, Minister, as part of that consideration that will be given to sponsorship of the Jack Jumpers going forward, how will you consider the proposal that's been put to you by Basketball Tasmania, which refers to the significant issues that community basketball has in surviving, both at the grassroots level and at the elite level with our NBL 1 competition? My understanding is they've put a proposal to you suggesting that funding for basketball on a more holistic level be considered, and looking at a framework for allocation of funding across professional, elite and grassroots. How will that proposal be considered as part of the considerations of the sponsorship deal with the Jack Jumpers?
Well, I think it's excellent that Basketball Tas are, turning their mind to these things and how we make, how we put our sports on a more sustainable, more certain footing. I think we've had funding arrangements for NBL 1 clubs over a period of time. I think there are real and perceived issues with that. And, it's the role of BTAS to think about these things. So, we'll certainly consider that and work with them to come up with what is a good system going forward. I think, Brent, have you got anything that you would like to add there? Just through you, Minister, it's a good point, and we've certainly been having some discussions about that integrated approach, because clearly when we can achieve that integrated approach, I think we get better outcomes, but we also probably get better bang for buck. The best analogy I can probably relate to is our funding for Cricket Tasmania, which is fully integrated. And the question begs, why don't we do that for all sports where there's an elite component? And it's a very fair point. I think that we will be looking at opportunities in that space moving forward. But obviously in recent years we've had some pretty significant changes to that elite space in many sports, including with the Jack Jumpers. Now we have WNBL entering AFL, etc. So I think where we can, we would work with the sport to achieve that. There's a bit of work to do in that space though. There is, noting that, at the very highest level these are privately owned entities and there are those challenges. But, I think from my perspective to see the full pathway of potential player progression, I think that's a goal, that's a really worthy goal, to have a clear set out pathway and, to have Tasmanians playing for the Jack Jumpers, be it men's or women's. I think that's where our head needs to be, and the clear progression of getting players through that system. And I think we've got all of those blocks. They're probably not quite align in a way to deliver that outcome.
Yes, well, it's really encouraging to hear you say that, Minister, and something you and I have discussed before, and I'll ask again in this forum is, would you consider the government developing a framework outlining its rationale for investing in sport at the different levels and providing some criteria and justification for how it allocates sport to the professional, commercial level, particularly where these entities are owned and run as owned and operated as businesses, then to the elite, sub-elite level and grassroots level. Is that something that you'll turn your mind to?
I'm not certainly against that. I guess the point I would make about, when the opportunity comes to have Tasmania represented at the elite level, the history of that has tended to be pretty ad hoc, and these opportunities come and we either take them or we don't take them, or we pursue them, we don't. There hasn't been in the past a neat framework for, we will seek to enter this competition at that time. Whether that's something that could be contemplated, noting, say, for example, in netball, I think there are some conversations happening there and some aspirations there, and certainly with football as well. So, I think it's not without some merit. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Brett, about how a piece of planning work like that might fit.
Thanks, Minister. Just to round out the basketball discussion, we do have an active representation from Basketball Tasmania at the moment that the department's considering and working closely with Ben and the team to better understand their proposal and what that means, and then we'll also try and set that against that broader thinking about an integrated approach. So we're actively working on that. Just in terms of that broader framework piece, I think it's a really good point that the department has made some structural changes in recent times because of the change in particularly the professional elite sporting landscape in Tasmania in the last 5 years, to try and bring those functions together. So where we're looking at pure content, like a Hawthorn game, that's assessed through Events Tas. Where we're looking at something like the Tasmanian Devils, that's a long-term sort of 50, 100-year strategic approach. What we have done is bring those functions of the department together, and in particular in the sporting space, we now have Active Tasmania, the Tasmanian Institute of Sport, and a function that we're currently establishing to centralise our dealings with professional sporting bodies together. So at least we will be dealing with these sports holistically in a strategic manner from one part of the department.
Okay.
And I guess another related part of that, I guess, is around infrastructure and facilities, and work that's been happening with the portal, and looking at potentially using that to inform an infrastructure and facility strategy going forward. And those two pieces of work potentially fit together.
And again, this is something I've asked before in relation to the facilities portal. You mentioned the next step being to develop infrastructure as community or just sporting infrastructure plan. Is that on the agenda now that facilities portal is developed, and is there any funding allocated for that purpose to develop a community sport infrastructure plan?
So I think we would like to see a few more layers of data added into the portal. It's got, I think, council at the moment and school at the moment, but there are some more data sets that need to go into that. But I think it is, it's the foundational piece of work that would inform that future infrastructure strategy, yes.
Okay. Can you provide detail on the government's funding agreements with the other top participation sports in Tasmania? So outline what funding the government provides to Cricket Tasmania, or you've talked about Cricket Tasmania, Football Tasmania as in round ball football, Netball Tasmania and Basketball Tasmania, and over what agreed period?
Thank you. I think Brett's probably got it at the fingertips there.
I'm not sure I have Minister, I'm not sure I have a list, but I know our funding for cricket TAS in the last financial year was 3.56 million.
Yep.
Football's 500.
What the other ones? Basketball, we funded in the 24-25 state budget 1.26 over 3 years to basketball TAS. That included NBL 1, and then there was an additional commitment of 600 for participation growth initiatives, so that is a total of 1.86 for basketball over and above jack jumpers. And was there one more? Sorry.
Did you say football, Tasmania?
Yeah, 500 is mine.
500,000.
Yep. With, some other things
So
floating around.
yeah, I mean, we have funded, for example, we've provided funding through our events budget for South Hobart Football Club in recent times to assist them with their NPL championship matches, etc.
Okay,
More on an events basis, though, than structural funding.
Sure, and Netball Tasmania was the other one.
Netball, I'll have to get that figure. I'll get that figure for you.
Okay, thank you. And what about AFL Tasmania, separate to the Devils? For a long time, the government has funded AFL Tasmania. So on top of the funding that's been provided to the Devils over the last couple of years, what was the funding provided to AFL Tasmania?
Let me see if I've got it. Don't think I do, but Brett will have it.
We will have it.
We've got plenty of people in the room, we'll have it.
Yes, we will. Yeah, we might just have to take that one on notice, and netball. AFL.
Okay, AFL and Netball, and I'd be interested to know
We'll have them momentarily.
Yes.
the funding amount as well as the agreed period and the purpose of the funding for those deeds.
So we might have to take that one on notice,
Okay.
Minister, just because we'll have to go and look at the deeds and provide you with a list of those agreed purposes.
Okay, yeah.
Probably won't have those on hand
Sure.
in the room today.
Yeah, I'd
But
be
we
interested to hear the funding amounts if you can
Yep.
find those, but the
We'll
other
have
details.
those.
And in terms of the deed, are they publicly available or are they?
Probably not, but
All right. We'll
The
provide
overarching purpose, I don't need to see the KPIs.
Yep. Yep.
The overarching purpose would be what I'd be interested in.
that. Right, good.
Thank you. And I know other members will have questions, so I'm conscious of that. The Active Tasmania Infrastructure Grant Program listed in the key deliverables has been cut from $5 million per annum to $2.5 million per annum, and is funded for only 2 years only across the forward estimate. So how can you justify, Minister, reducing the spend on community sporting infrastructure when clearly there's not enough facilities to keep up with increasing participation demand?
It is. It's been, as you rightly say, an important part of our offering into community sport. I would continue to argue of its importance, but I would also recognise that decisions need to be made, and each budget will have its own set of priorities, and my job as Sports Minister is to do a good job in selling the need for the community infrastructure grants.
So you'll continue to do that as we prepare for the next budget next year. Do you expect that there will be an allocation for the Active Tasmania Grants Infrastructure Program?
I do. I think the Premier has made statements about his expectations for the community infrastructure grants. They align with mine. He has made commitments, as I say, in that space to have the full allocation or the allocation returned to its previous level of $5 million per annum. So I'm very hopeful of that circumstance.
And is there any other funding available for sport and recreation infrastructure over and above that program? It used to be the major sports, major grants program, sport and rec back in the day when I once worked there. I think it's called something else now, but is there another pool of funding for infrastructure?
There are a couple of pools of funding for various purposes. The infrastructure grant, I think, is the one that deals with those kind of larger quantums up to 500,000, where we're seeing change rooms being done up and those sorts of things. But there are a number of grant opportunities around sporting equipment, that sort of thing. Brett, have you got those in front of you?
I do. Thank you, Minister. Just to add a point on the active infrastructure fund, the original commitment of 10 million was honoured. The reason it was split into two lots of 2.5 was because of the problem with the budget. And the second lot of that 2.5 is currently being assessed, so that program is still being rolled out. The reason the second 5, which was split into 2.5, if you follow me, was held back was because of the 2024 election commitments, which I think was 110 election commitments, which were mostly for infrastructure for sporting clubs. So whilst they were being rolled out, which took us a few months, we decided to pause the second 5 million so that clubs had an opportunity to properly apply. And then obviously that second 5 was split into two lots of 2.5. So that's complicated, but I just wanted to provide that,
That is correct. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate you providing
there are
clarification.
there are a couple of other funding opportunities for clubs. These broadly come out of the CSF, the Community Support Fund, which is a treasury fund, but they do make an allocation to the department each year.
25%, isn't it?
Yeah, it's risen to around about 1.8 million in recent years. It used to be around about $1 million.
Based on the losses from poker machines, which is a challenge in itself, isn't it, really?
Correct. So we have an active industry project fund, which isn't focused on infrastructure, but it's focused on helping sporting bodies uplift their capability, their governance, their structures, their processes, etc. That's funded through the CSF. We also have the Active Clubs program, which is also funded out of the CSF, and that's focused on providing sporting clubs, not organisations, but clubs, the ability to get some new equipment.
Yeah, so in that funding pool you mentioned of 1.8 million, is that just for the infrastructure grants?
Yes.
So how much funding is there for the state sporting organisations and other peak bodies provided through Active Tasmania, Minister, do you know?
Sorry, what was the question?
Active Tasmania, by my understanding, is they have infrastructure grants programs that local clubs can apply for, and then there's another pool of funding for state sporting organisations and other peak bodies. How much is in this funding pool?
Brett?
Yep. So the CFS is split across the Active Infrastructure Project Fund, which is the one where we're assisting clubs to improve themselves. In 24-25, we funded that to $784,974. The equipment program, which was the Active Industry Fund, that was funded to $2,439,000 for that period.
Okay, and what about the state sporting organisation funding pool for participation outcomes? That's a different funding pool, is my understanding.
I'll have to check that one.
I'm interested to know what the current funding amount is for that pool and how it's changed over time. Do you know, Minister?
Not off the top of my head, no.
No. Which fund were you referring to, sorry?
So the funding pool that funds like Volleyball Tasmania, Badminton Tasmania, the state sporting organisations.
Yep, sorry. So that's our specific purpose funding for organisations. In the period for 24-25, the total paid in those funding arrangements was $5,787,000. So that's to clubs and organisations to support their operations.
Okay. And do you know how that's changed in the last 5 years? Has that been around the same figure or?
I think it's probably gone up, but I'd have to get those figures
Are you able
for
to take that on notice?
Yeah, I've only got the last financial year, I'm afraid,
Okay.
in terms of actuals.
Yep. Thank you.
And is that in a form elsewhere that would be reasonably easily to collate in terms of what we're taking on notice?
I think so.
Okay. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Good.